And then it's Halloween Valley, as you mentioned at the top of the show. Nintendo decided to have a Halloween-themed sale on the eShop, and that included pretty much every Castlevania game on Virtual Console. And as you know, I've been kind of going through my play every Metroidvania, Castlevania in order, chronological order of release. So I picked up Aria of Sorrow on GBA, which I will get to at some point. But I also decided I was going to pick up the original Castlevania, the NES game, the first, the foremost.
How many were on NES?
3 were on NES. Okay. So the first 3 were on NES, and then there was Super Castlevania 4. There's Rondo of Blood, which I think is a TurboGrafx game, and then Symphony of the Night, I think. So maybe 6 games before you get into the Metroidvania era. So there's a lot of history before it becomes like what people know it as today, or I guess, to be honest, people don't really know it as anything today because Konami doesn't give a fuck.
And that's because this original, it's level based and it's not a Metroidvania area.
It's not structured in the same way. It is it's traditional kind of. A lot of NES games were like this, where you kind of side-scrolling levels and you fight a boss at the end, right? So this game I have watched multiple people play. And I know it relatively well. I understand the mechanics of Castlevania, and I think that they're very cool. This is also one of the hardest games I've ever played in my life. It is unforgivingly brutal. I was talking about Mario 3 a while ago, and how I thought it had fuck you level design, and how I thought that was horrible and it was bad. And Castlevania also has fuck you level design, but the difference for me is, and I was trying to explain this.
Walking on eggshells here.
Yeah, I know, but like, I'm trying to like rationalize in my head because I find it very difficult to be like, on the one hand, I really like playing Castlevania. On the other hand, Mario 3 frustrates me, right? Because essentially they're doing the same things where they're forcing you to learn levels and replay them. And what it essentially comes down to is Mario 3 is just a much bigger and longer game in scope. And so the idea of making progression and moving through it is it's much harder to kind of get a sense of like, hey, I'm doing something and I'm achieving something, because the levels there are so many of them and it goes on forever. Castlevania is a very short game. And so each level unto itself is kind of contained into a series of rooms that have a very specific setup that can be learned and that can be executed on.
You're learning less, I guess. You're learning fewer levels.
Right, and it's also, I mean, it's also down to control, because I don't like the slipperiness of Mario 3 as much. Castlevania has maybe the opposite problem, where it is extremely sluggish and tankish.
Plodding.
Like, your character moves very slowly. The whole idea of air control with jumps just doesn't exist. Like, once you've committed to a jump forward, you can't, like, adjust yourself in midair. Like, you are moving, either you're jumping straight upwards, or you're jumping forwards and there's no movement or adjustment. So it is very much about anticipation and knowing where things are going to be before you attempt them, right? And the thing is, when you get to a level and you start to go through it, you're going to get murdered. Like, you're going to straight up die. You're going to have no idea how the hell anyone got through it. But over time, as you kind of analyze it and think through, like, okay, there are these certain weapons that I can get, and I can potentially do this to this enemy, and I need to make sure that that happens at this specific time. You build up this memory bank and this kind of toolkit that you can employ, and soon enough, you're getting through the whole level taking no hits and getting to the boss. And that's where it kind of breaks down for me, because some of the bosses are infuriatingly difficult, to the point where, like, not only getting through this level is difficult, just straight up beating this boss, if there was to just be a spawn point right by it, I would have a hard time anyway. So obviously, like, that's a massive problem. I was very much trying to play this game like people would back in the day, where I wasn't using save states, because I thought, like, as a shorter game, I can probably move my way through it and learn it and make sure that I'm understanding everything. But it just got to a point where it was just, I can't. Like, the last 2 levels are just some of the hardest things I've ever done in games. And it broke me down, Bal. It killed me. Maybe one day I'll go back and be able to actually push through and finish it properly. But my God, like the Grim Reaper fight in particular is one where you have this long corridor of Medusa heads at the same time as these Axe Knights, so you're having to like make sure you're not getting hit by those and their weird movement patterns, whilst also making sure not to get hit by the axes thrown either up or down, and moving them back at the same time while not being hit, while retaining all your sub weapons and your heart so that you can use them. Look, it's a level of just minutia that kind of gets ridiculous. But I really like Castlevania. I just think the mechanics are fun. I think that having that idea of the sub-weapon where you can collect and figure out whether you like throwing the axes or using the holy water, and kind of that customization that comes along with it. The whip, I just think, is a cool weapon. It just doesn't get used in video games at all. Like I struggle to think of any like 3D games that have taken the whip as a main weapon and used it competently. I think Pandora's Tower maybe one that did it, but like aside from that, it's very hard to imagine like any other series that does this kind of this thing. So yeah, I don't know, it just has a great aesthetic to it. And of course, like the big thing about these games is the music. The soundtrack for the original Castlevania is fucking fantastic. So as I was, spending 2.5 hours on this one level going through, I was listening to podcasts and stuff while I was doing it, but, I wouldn't have minded just sitting there and listening to the soundtrack, because it is just so, so good. And it's one of those things I think a lot of people miss from these games is that fantastic Konami soundtrack. So, yeah, it was a tough one, Bally. But
you did it.
I'm glad I played through it, because really gives me context now for just how fucking difficult that game is.
Are you going to play 2 and 3 anytime soon?
I don't know. I don't think I ever want to play 3 because I watched Vinny Caravella play through 3, and the nightmare seems like unfathomable. Like, it's this game but turned up like 3 or 4 notches, and I don't think I have the stomach for that, quite honestly. 2 is weird. 2 is basically, it's kind of where that kind of seed of the Metroid elements started seeping in, but as with every single second game in a video game series in the NES era, it was just an offshoot that was weird and completely different from the original. So yeah, it's just strange how that happened, isn't it? Like, Mario 2 is obviously a completely different game, Doki Doki Panic. Zelda 2 is a side-scrolling RPG. Like, Metroid 2 was on the Game Boy and was weird. So generally, like, it follows that pattern, and I don't know, it's one of those games that I think I could go through, but maybe have a guide, because there's dumb shit like you have to go to this very specific spot that looks like nothing in particularly special about it, and crouch there for like 10 seconds, and a thing will come along and whisk you away to a different place. So that's the kind of level of fucked up obscurity in Castlevania 2. So I would imagine that having a guide at hand for that would be a necessity, I'll say. But yeah, I mean, now I can focus on going back to my good old GBA Castlevanias and leveling up and just exploring castles. So I'm glad to do that.
And they're on the Wii Virtual Console. You've just got with the sale. Cool.
Yes. So, if you enjoyed this discussion and would like to hear more, consider subscribing to us on YouTube and following the podcast playlist. You can also find us on iTunes and various other places. Follow us on Twitter at TNL Podcast, and email us thisnintendolife@gmail.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.